Welcome everyone to WeREndurance Webinar series. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Teresa Sequist, who will be a new New York City marathon runner in the fall, but also she runs a company called Moxie Life, and I love her magnesium product. And I know a lot of you guys do too. And also she's going to talk about micronutrition and how it relates to training and how we can get more efficient. So without further ado, Teresa.
Oh, thanks, Hillary. Thanks for joining the presentation. I will be doing a screen share, so I'll be futzing around with that for a little bit, but I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been an endurance athlete my whole life. I've been an All-American track runner in college. I finished 6 Ironmans, one being Kona, and my passion is really health oriented. And the reasons why I decided to launch Moxie Life was twofold. In my professional career, I am a mineral researcher, and discovering all the aspects and nuances of minerals in health and how it affected my performance once I had this aha moment. And that aha moment was all my career, my athletic career, I suffered from muscle cramping. And so being a mineral researcher, I'm thinking there's a reason for this, and it's got to be a deficiency somewhere. So went into a deep dive mode of minerals, and my discovery for me was magnesium deficiencies. So I was exhibiting all sorts of symptoms of magnesium deficiencies now that I know what they are, and it can be wide and vast, or subtle and subliminal. Mine presented specifically when I was racing and training. No doubt at mile 90, I'd just fall over and start crying on the bike. It was pretty severe. In college, it definitely inhibited my performances. You know, after a hard quarter mile, I would just buckle down and fall over. So, so that my personal experiences with how minerals, especially magnesium, were affecting me was one of the reasons why I launched Moxie Life, and our HydroMag product is our flagship product. The other is the more research I've done, and I've been researching minerals for up to 15 years now, and specifically magnesium 14, but the concept of minerals, they're not sexy, no doubt. But I think our society is really missing out on the opportunity to elevate health in general. And for specifically athletes, the RDI, the recommended daily intake of magnesium, or any minerals for that matter, is really simply as a baseline for survival. We as athletes, endurance athletes, we need at least 20 to 30% more elemental levels of minerals to keep up with how our body utilizes minerals. So always keep that in mind. The second thing to always note is minerals, your body does not have the capability of making a mineral. You need to get minerals from external sources, meaning your food sources. So if anything, walk away from this presentation understanding that facet. is that you need to be cognizant of where you're getting your minerals from, because your body doesn't make them, and they are critical for every chemical reaction in your system. So let's see, I will I'll start the presentation. So that's my story. Moxie Life is created to fill gaps in our nutrition. And what I've discovered over the past 14 years is my personal experience, but this presentation is going to really tailor on the 3 top deficient micronutrients that we have discovered in athletes. And so what I want us to walk away from is understanding which micronutrients we're deficient in, understanding the differences in between vitamins and minerals, and know how they affect performance and health, and where our product lines can help you in that facet. As a reminder, this information is only for educational purposes and is not intended as treatment recommendations. So the talking points, what are micronutrients? What an athlete wants to target for your performance, top deficient micronutrients, and clinical studies to validate the research on micronutrients and the deficiencies, negative performance outcomes, and which products can apply to these nutrient deficiencies from our company. So without micronutrients, your cells function at only a fraction of their potential. The director of the Exercise Physiology and Human Performance Lab at the University of Colorado, Denver. He is so spot on. I had to include that in the presentation. So as athletes, what are we looking for in terms of performance targets? We're looking at maximizing the efficiencies of our gains, quality over quantity. So we want to race and recover faster. In some cases, we want to increase our muscle mass. We definitely want to control inflammation. Weight maintenance, whether you have an overactive thyroid where you're trying to gain weight, or if you are struggling with weight gain problems, or are overweight. Some of these are performance targets that every individual, as being as unique as we are, cater to and look at for their individual needs. So what are micronutrients? Basically, they're vitamins and minerals, okay? They are obtained externally through food, and internally, our body is able to make certain micronutrients such as vitamin D. And why are they important? Obviously, they're critical to every chemical process in the body. Every chemical process in the body. I'll repeat myself later. You need them to optimize and utilize all your foods. And without them, you cannot create energy. So the bottom line is to optimize your energy utilization, you need to optimize your micronutrients. So the big question is, why are we all deficient? And we're looking at metadata regarding deficiencies. Over 70% of the deficiencies in athletes is due to diet, period. So this is easily rectified through paying attention to a very nutrient-dense diet. Basically, if you haven't heard of REDS, reduced energy deficiency, it is a common occurrence. It occurs with Olympic athletes. It occurs mostly with endurance athletes also. It's your caloric intake is lower than your energy output. So you get behind the 8 ball and things start to, well, the wheels fall off the bus, let's put it that way. Oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a chemical reaction within the body that is due to exercise, extensive exercise, over exercise. It happens with mental stress. Stress is stress, whether it's physical or mental. It creates chemical reactions which create negative outcomes in the system. Hemolysis is another reason for micronutrient deficiencies, more particular for iron. And what that term means is your foot strike is crushing your red blood cells. So that's why you have a reduction in your iron levels. Altitude training has also been known to affect your micronutrients just because of the excessive requirements for oxygen at altitude. So the top 8 deficient micronutrients as minerals, we see the top 4: iron, magnesium, calcium, and zinc. The reasons for that is just because they are utilized at such high requirements in the body. And if you're not replenishing, you go behind the 8 ball. As well as vitamins, your B12s, your Ds, your Cs, your Es. We're seeing a higher incident of vitamin B12 simply because we're seeing a higher plant-based athletic community. Vitamin B12 is more specifically found in meats. So we're seeing a higher incidence of B12 deficiencies nowadays. And that can be rectified by supplementation as well. So what are the outcomes of these various vitamin deficiencies? Well, B12 energy. It affects weight gains, reduced muscle mass, you'll be more sickly, run down. It also affects neurotransmission, so you may be on an emotional roller coaster, if you will. Vitamin D, it's an important vitamin in bone mineral density. So what you may see happening, and I'm seeing this more for women than men, but a higher incident of stress fractures. And it is because it's playing a role in the monthly cycle as well. You'll have slower tissue regeneration and dental disorders. Your vitamin C, critical for immune function. So it will, and also oxidative stress. So you'll probably end up having slower recovery, slower wound healing, feeling sick and run down as well. Vitamin E is also crucial for your immune system in the event of maybe crashing on your bike or falling down and hurting yourself. When you have a skin lesion or wound, that's where your vitamin E also can play a specific role in wound healing also. It does affect your heart, and it's also critical for your vision and eyesight. So just over the years, when as a younger athlete, I have always been paying attention in my collegiate days to my nutrient intake. I was called a granola girl back then, but I always found myself gravitating to natural foods versus processed foods. Of course, I went down the rabbit hole of M&Ms a couple of times, but the point being, I feel like I am one of the healthier athletes. I'll be almost 60 soon, and I'm feeling spry, and I'm able to come back into endurance training, I think, a little bit quicker than somebody who wasn't paying attention all their life to the nutrient density of what you're putting in the pie hole. So mineral deficiency outcomes to include iron, magnesium, calcium, and zinc. With iron, my brother, he was iron deficient, and what we noticed was he was highly irritable. His deficiency was due to a variety of reasons, but what we noticed and what made us understand a little bit more about what was going on with him was he was a bear, and we didn't know why, because he never was a bear before, but we found out that he was iron deficient. So he was also fatigued. He was just tired. So for an athlete, what iron deficiency means is you're going to lower your VO2 max capabilities, which obviously is important. Magnesium is also one of the top deficient minerals in athletes. That ties into your vitamin D deficiency when it comes to bone mineral density. Your bone strength, integrity, relies on magnesium because it does create a hormone which creates this the catalyst to the bone building mechanism and matrix. So you may have more stress fractures if you are magnesium deficient, especially if you're magnesium and vitamin D deficient. Muscle cramping, restless legs at night, eye twitching. It presents also as excessive salt output. So we see athletes that are just covered in salty kits. Well, we see them adding more salt to their diet. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need more salt, because the way magnesium works within that cycle is it actually turns on and off the sodium and potassium pump regulator. It's a part of the ATP cycle. So the ATP cycle turns on and off the sodium and potassium pump regulator. If you don't have your magnesium to create the ATP energy, well, then your body doesn't really know what to do with the sodium and or potassium that you're introducing into your system. So we have successfully introduced magnesium into these athletes who present themselves as a salt lick, and have reduced that expression or expelling the salt, so they're utilizing it more effectively. Magnesium is also critical for your heart health, atrial fibrillation. That is the electrical conduction within your heart. We had an athlete who was about to just give it all up because she'd been suffering from AFib her whole life, and no one had talked to her about using magnesium or supplementing her diet with magnesium. Well, it comes to be that she was using our product as directed, and I saw her a year later and she said, you know, this is very strange that I have to tell you this, but I don't have AFib anymore. And I said, well, that's great, you know, but it was, that just shows you and presents how critical minerals can be to your overall health and function as an athlete. So, so the next mineral would be calcium, reduce muscle contractions. Calcium is your antagonist to magnesium. Calcium contracts muscles and magnesium relaxes muscles. So you'll have reduced muscle contractions. This also plays a role in your heart function and muscle contractions within your heart and irregular heartbeats. Obviously, calcium builds strong bones. So that plays a role with your vitamin D and your magnesium. Now, zinc is also most athletes post Ironmans or any endurance event, you'll find that there's a crash and burn following these events. Zinc plays a role in your immune cycle, and zinc also is a mineral that's not readily available in our food products, especially if you're a plant-based or vegetarian, because it's found mostly in seafood, shellfish, oysters, things like that. Unless you're focusing on your zinc, you should probably supplement or complement your diet with a supplement. But the deficiency outcomes are obviously your immune system. You're going to feel sick. You're going to get run down quicker. You'll definitely crash and burn after a hard effort in an A race or any race for that matter. It plays plays a role in heart disorders and vision impairment as well. So the top 3 micronutrient deficiencies that we've seen in research and clinical studies are iron, magnesium, and vitamin D. So we've got some clinical study overviews. We'll start with iron simply because there is so much research on how iron affects the outcome and performance of athletes and health. One of the clinical studies that jumped out at me was a Bulgarian study where they did a 2-week controlled study of all of the blood biomarkers, ferritin levels, etc. And they concluded that iron was the #1 deficient micronutrient impeding their performance. So Vuelta a España, 18 cyclists were tested for their iron parameters, serum cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone, and muscle indicators. So they, over the course of a 3-week stage race, they found that they supplemented their diets with 80 milligrams of inorganic iron, which is it's not as high absorbing, and there are better irons out there, but for this clinical study, they use something that is readily available and for probably cost purposes. But looking at the outcome of adding 80 milligrams of iron a day and side note, the recommended daily intake right now in the United States is 15 milligrams of iron. That has actually been reduced by 3 milligrams of iron. And I'm trying to get to the bottom line as to why they reduced iron intake in society. And again, I look at the RDIs as really just the baseline for survival. And for athletes, keep in mind that we need and require and utilize all of our micronutrients at a higher rate. So getting back to the study, they added 80 milligrams, which is quite a high amount of iron to be used on a daily basis. And over the course of the 3 weeks of competition, the outcome was they prevented a decline in the ferritin, hemoglobin, and hematocrit levels compared to the other athletes in the study. And it also reduced cortisol, an accumulated stress response to exercise intensity. Now, what is interesting as a follow-up, these athletes were also taking 400 milligrams of magnesium. So if we go back to the other study on iron, these athletes were also taking magnesium as well. So that actually makes sense that their cortisol levels were also regulated and reduced over that time. For the magnesium, they were looking at specifically preventing muscle damage. So when I looked at both of these studies, what really stuck out to me was the fact that they were presenting for the iron, they were looking at the cortisol levels, but whether or not the researchers were understanding how magnesium plays a role with cortisol, it kind of made sense that they were being supplemented with 400 milligrams of magnesium as well, and their cortisol levels were reduced. So, but for the purposes of what they were looking for specifically with the magnesium and muscle damage, they saw that it was protecting the effect on muscle damage as well. So you've got some key benefits behind the iron and the magnesium there. As I had mentioned before, I've been researching magnesium for many, many years. And so these 3 separate magnesium studies conducted by Dr. Chen on animals, what he saw in these studies regarding magnesium, number one, it elevated glucose ability to the brain, blood, and muscle during exercise. So he was looking at 400 milligrams per dosing. His second studies said that it reduced the accumulation of lactate in blood. And so the translation for that is it's going to delay your muscle fatigue. Because, you know, when you're talking about at the end of a marathon, yeah, the lactic acid builds up, and by supplementing with magnesium, you may be able to increase your lactic acid threshold in the long term. And the third study was shown to maintain plasma glucose at a relatively high level. So meaning that if it's circulating in your system, your muscles have a longer time frame to absorb the glucose, so that will assist in your muscle tissue recovery. So I pulled together some vitamin D stats, and I just want to point out that the meta-analysis of vitamin D deficiency is really because of a lack of awareness of how sun exposure plays a role in vitamin D, the process of making vitamin D within your system, which it kind of makes sense. And to expand on that thought, the use of sunscreen or the excessive use of sunscreen may be playing a role in vitamin D deficiency, and we might not even be aware of that. Understanding you've got to balance the cancer risks with your sun exposure. However, it just takes 20 minutes a day to have sun exposure. It doesn't matter whether it's early in the morning, late in the evening, high noon, preferably early in the morning or later in the afternoon. You just need sun exposure on your skin without sunscreen to help maximize your vitamin D manufacturing in your system. So what they found with vitamin D stats is over 58% of North American athletes are vitamin D deficient. So one study, I believe it was in Norway, found that 5% of the collegiate athletes didn't even meet the US RDI allowances for vitamin D. 70% of Israeli athletes were vitamin D deficient, and they're in a sun, there's a lot of sun in Israel. So, it's not only the sun aspect, but there's more research being done on how the body is utilizing vitamin D as athletes. So, the rabbit hole of micronutrients is really starting to come to fruition in understanding how critical these micronutrients and vitamins are to an athlete, and exposing why it's so significant that you have to pay attention to it. The other aspects of vitamin D deficiency that are presenting themselves is muscle soreness. So 93 of patients who presented common clinical symptoms had of skeletal and muscle pain were vitamin D deficient. So fibromyalgia, and magnesium and vitamin D are all in that circle. They've seen that increasing your vitamin D can help with your neurotransmitters, your brain function, your focus. And another heart health aspect to vitamin D is it has been presented as showing increased arterial stiffness and endothelial dysfunction in the blood vessels. So, as athletes, we really need to focus on the micronutrients as a whole. And here's a few articles that are out there and can help you understand a little bit more about micronutrients and how they present themselves and the effectiveness on our performance. So basically, the bottom line to elevating micronutrients is you're going to perform better. You're going to have better blood sugar regulation. It's going to be easier to manage your weight, whether they're gains or losses. Can help reduce your muscle soreness, balance your hormones, your cortisol levels, your testosterone, your estrogen, etc. Elevate your blood circulation. Obviously, iron is critical to your blood. Magnesium is also critical to actually helping your blood flow more freely. It acts as a NO, and you'll recover faster. So our suggestions from our advisory board, we have cardiovascular doctors, we have counselors, registered dietitians. things that you really need to focus on, you need to have an annual visit with your physician, have a complete blood panel review, and really listen to your gut. And I was happy to know that seeing as Hillary is exhibiting some signs of iron deficiency, constantly being cold, and if she's eating ice cubes, maybe that's another sign. The other aspect is to actually get your intracellular blood levels tested. So Hillary, you mentioned Inside Tracker, that company is making great strides to helping athletes understand where all their micronutrient biomarkers are, and adding in the education of what food sources that you do need to be supplementing or adding into your diet. So I really think the Inside Tracker has become a really good tool for athletes. There's many online testing websites. Persona Labs is one that we have partnered with in the past. They do have their online tests are a bit less expensive, but then you're trading out the added education that Inside Tracker can provide. Direct Labs, SpectraCell. SpectraCell is actually, they were the first company to really expose to the naturopathic industry online blood testing. So they've got all their ducks in order, and you can guarantee that they're using the highest quality blood testing facilities and biomarker analysis out there. So how Moxie Life nutrition products can add value to any type of micronutrient deficiency that you're experiencing. We have what's called athlete's iron, and we use a chelated iron, which means that our iron is attached to amino acids, and we use what's called Ferrochel. Ferrochel is made by Albion Minerals. This little guy right here is 18 milligrams per dose. The latest in iron supplementation is to not use it every day because of hepcidin levels, which is a hormone which actually reduces iron uptake. So for iron specifically, what we're recommending now is to take your iron in the morning prior to any type of exercise. It doesn't have to be taken on an empty stomach or with food. That's just the uniqueness of the iron that we're using in athlete's iron. And to supplement every other day. Our second is our Hydromag, which is our chelated magnesium. It's 150 milligrams per serving. The recommended RDI is in between 380 and 420 respectively for women and men. However, as athletes, as I repeat myself, we need a little bit more, and micronutrients, period. So it's delicious. I drink it all day long. It doesn't cause GI issues. And that's our flagship product because of my personal issues. So our Phytolite is, it's a wonderful micronutrient electrolyte drink. It's ultra hydrating. It contains a nutrient called choline, which helps the permeability of fluids in and out of your cells. Choline actually, it helps, it's the foundation to a cell wall, if you will. So when all your choline is is activated and in your cell walls, that means that you're able to introduce fluids easier and as well as your micronutrients within the cell wall and the mitochondria. So Phytolite has all the vitamins and minerals. It's plant-based. All of our products are vegan friendly. And let's see, we're unveiling on this webinar that we will be coming out with a greens drink. It's going to be called Micro 62. It will be one of the most robust green drinks available. We saw that there was a need for more greens out there. Athletic Greens is one of the more well-known products. However, when we over the last couple of years, well, we've tasted a lot of greens, and it's number one, it's very expensive, and number two, it doesn't really taste really good. If you had any experience with the Moxie Life line, we have the best formulator in the country as on our board, and she is my partner. She is amazing when it comes to developing taste profiles for supplements with the use of all natural ingredients. I repeat, they're all natural. There's no synthetic flavoring in any of our products. And she, the Micro 62, the number 62 comes from all the different plants, probiotics, prebiotics, vitamins, and minerals that are in this formula. So we look forward to launching this in the next couple months. But you know, if you're looking for a go-to, if you don't like to eat vegetables, blah, 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 you should try the product out because it actually tastes good. Kids like it, and you're going to get all of your micronutrients from that product. So thanks for listening. If you have questions, let's hear them.
So I have a question. If you're not sure of what kind of micronutrients that you're getting in via your diet, is there any downside to taking an iron or a magnesium supplement?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're let me get rid of that. So yeah, the downside of taking iron is a toxic mineral. If it's taken in amounts and levels that your body does not need. Anything for that matter can be toxic in levels that your body does not need. That's why we always, when we share information with athletes, we always highly suggest that you find out where your biomarkers are to start, because you can have negative outcomes from using too much of one thing, and iron is one of those. It's very reactive, you know, and that's why we've used a chelated mineral, so it doesn't cause GI issues, if you will.
Okay. And can you get your biomarkers and basically your regular blood test at an annual exam with your doctor, or?
I mean, the reason why I'm going to just jump in here.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the reason why I did Inside Tracker is Inside Tracker really delves into everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually do get a 20% discount. I'll be sending that around to everybody if anybody wants to try it. They actually come to your house, they take your blood. I think they took like 10 vials yesterday or the day before, and they will give me a complete report of every single vitamin, mineral that I'm either deficient or not deficient in. And, you know, and that's really, you know, what Teresa's saying is that you really need that, because the doctor's offices are not doing that. They're doing the basic CBC, you know, basic tests.
But-
add,
but- I'm sorry, but doesn't that capture your condition at that point of time? And that if you say are going into your, your heavy cycle of training, won't your biomarkers change? If your diet doesn't change?
yes, and to elaborate on what Hillary was saying, the CDC panels tell you where your blood serum levels are. The way micronutrients work in the body is they need to be in your system, in your blood at all times to facilitate every organ function and every chemical reaction. So it's regulation. Micronutrients are tightly regulated, and some are more tightly regulated than others. So for instance, calcium and magnesium, they're stored in your muscles and in your bones. If your diet is deficient, if you're not intaking enough of these micronutrients, specifically calcium and magnesium, your body is smart. It's going to say, I need to take them from my muscles and my bones to make sure every chemical reaction is working in my body. So it's like your bank account. It's going to go down if you're not putting money in. Your muscles are going to be fatigued. Your bones are going to become brittle, right? So these tests, intracellular blood tests, evaluate what's going on within the cell, not just what's floating around in the bloodstream.
Mhm.
So you're taking a big chunk of data and you're compartmentalizing it, which is what you want as an athlete. You want to understand what's going on in that cell, because if you don't have an understanding of that, what's going to happen is your body is smart. It's going to take all the micronutrients it needs from its storage areas and dump it into your bloodstream constantly.
Sure. And I'm not arguing against the need to make sure you get the proper micronutrients. I'm just trying to understand, how do you know how much in terms of micronutrients you should be adding to your diet or subtracting for your diet as your schedule and your diet changes throughout the year? And it seems like you would have to get, your biomarkers tested, quite regularly.
Yes.
Okay.
So I would break it into quarterly blocks, or if you've got an A race that you're training for, start your baseline before you start your training, evaluate it after 2 blocks of significant training. Try to test before you go into a hard block, test after that block, so you are understanding what your body's needs are prior and after training.
Okay.
And you might be surprised.
Okay.
Yeah. So any
I
other?
have one other question before we wrap this up. So with cramping, right? So, you've got HydroMag, which I think is an excellent product. What happens if you start cramping during a major race? Like, I know people who just did Ironman Lake Placid, and during the swim, they started cramping and they jump on the bike and then they had to DNF because they were cramping so much. It doesn't make sense to just take in salt at that point, or is it too late?
Oh, it's kind of too late. One of the purposes of this discussion is to help understand the critical nature of why you need to optimize and elevate all your micronutrients prior to racing and training. I mean, and understand the balance of how these micronutrients play a role in your performance. So the case in point for magnesium and sodium and potassium. Well, without having enough magnesium in your system, your body doesn't know what to do with the sodium and or potassium. So you add more sodium in it, you are offsetting the balance, the natural balance that your body always wants to be in. You kind of mess it up.
Get it. Mhm.
So topping off all your micronutrients and your electrolytes prior to the race there is significant value to that, like a 10% better in your performance. The other aspect to performance and stress is stress eats up magnesium at very high levels. So a lot of athletes say, I never cramp when I train, but it's only when I race. And it's like, well, your body is smart. Internally, you might not be exhibiting stress, but internally it's like, what am I doing? What have I got coming up? And how am I going to deal with it? Well, it just starts all this, the domino effect of, okay, my body's just going to start to utilize all these micronutrients at much higher levels because of stress.
Cool. Thank you. Anybody else before we wrap this up? No? Thank you very much. This was so informative, and I'm going to be sharing this with the rest of the group. And yeah.
Well, thanks for joining and offering me the opportunity to present.
And again, we get a 20% discount. Thank you very much, Teresa. And that's all on the list that I sent everybody. I'll resend it at some point as well. All right. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Teresa.
All right. You're welcome.